I got it on my side. Okay, there's 37 participants. I think we'll wait one more. We'll wait till 11:30 and then we'll start. Hello, good morning, good late morning to everyone. Thank you for joining our workshop for the San Joaquin Valley. I'm Michael Segala. I'm a local urban planner, housing person, transportation person here in the Fresno Clovis area. On the screen, you also see Robert Phipps. He's the Assistant Director of Fresno Council of Governments. And then we have our panelists, Jenna Chiligarian and Monique Emerson on the bottom, and I'll introduce them in a sec. So once again, thank you. This is the second workshop of our workshop series under the REAP program, the Regional Early Action Planning Program. A few house rules before we get started. We have 3 ways to communicate. If you're a panelist, if you're a participant, you're probably on mute, but you can raise your hand and we will call on you. You can use the question and answer function, or you could use the chat function if you need to communicate with us during the presentation. We will take a couple natural breaks for questions, but most of the questions on the accessory dwelling unit side will be taken at the end of their presentation. This is a 1-hour workshop and we should be done by 12:30. This workshop and this workshop series is also sponsored by the American Planning Association Central Section, so you can get credit towards your AICP certification by attending this workshop and completing the evaluation that we'll send a link to you during and after this workshop. All the workshop materials that you'll see today will be posted on our REAP workshop webpage, as well as a recording of this entire webinar. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Robert and I will give you a quick overview of what the REAP program is, and then we'll turn it over to our esteemed panelists, Monique and Jenna, to continue the presentation. So here we go. A little bit of background on REAP. It was created a few years ago. It provided for the first time a lot of money to the regions, in this case, the 8 COGs or regional planning agencies of the San Joaquin Valley, $18.9 million to do housing planning work in anticipation of the next housing element cycle. Part of this effort required us to develop a 24-member REAP committee for housing, which is primarily elected officials that you see on the screen. They meet 2 to 3 times a year to help guide policy and fiscal decisions for this activity, the REAP program. Robert?
Right. So there are a few kind of major categories of work that have been conducted so far. We have about half the money in hand for the valley-wide share of REAP. Primarily the goals are for a better to develop a better methodology for the regional housing needs assessment, and also to further development of actual housing, and particularly affordable housing. Most of the efforts to date have been in terms of direct sub-allocations, direct or indirect sub-allocations to individual jurisdictions, and then kind of a valley-wide slate of activities and work efforts, of which this is this workshop series. Go ahead. So you can see here in the table the funding distribution, about $19 million total to the valley, of which about $5.5 million are for activities, deliverables that are valley-wide in scope. The rest of it parceled out pro rata by population to each of the 8 councils of governments or transportation commissions or associations of government in the San Joaquin Valley. Go ahead. Again, what some of those uses, the way that the funding has been prioritized, again, kind of streamlining the development process, coordination of a regional project pipeline, supporting local jurisdictions impacted by COVID-19. There's a wide range of eligible activities for the funds. You know, there are some ineligible uses that we'll get to in just a moment, but the HCD has been very good in trying to be as flexible as possible. And each regional planning agency is responsible for kind of developing its own program as to how the funds will be used within a given sub-region. So again, technical assistance, primarily technical assistance, which is also being handled on a valley-wide basis, the potential for countywide trust funds, feasibility studies, infrastructure studies, covering the costs of staffing, temporary consultant staffing. All of these are eligible funds. And of course, all this information will be made available after this workshop as well. I know we're going through it quickly. Obviously, anything unrelated to housing production is an ineligible use. And this is also planning funds. So this REAP money cannot be used for direct construction or development.
Okay, so a lot of the information too is on our REAP webpage. You'll see the URL on the bottom on the left. We do have technical assistance. We have 4 consultant firms, of which Precision Engineering, who's our panelist today, is one of. We have 4 consulting firms that provide assistance to any jurisdiction in the Valley for a host of activities. So please sign up if you're interested. We have a few cities already in the queue. Thank you. This workshop series, again, APA sponsored, and here's the future ones. I want to point out we do have a date now for the pro housing workshop, Tuesday, September 28th at 1 p.m. You will get an invite to register for that one as well. Robert and I's contact information is here, and then at the sub-regional level, every county MPO planning agency, here's the contacts as well. So if you know these folks, this is who you should be talking to in terms of the local funding. So at this point, I will stop my share and ask the panelists to put their PowerPoint up. Once again, we have Monique Emerson and Janet Chilgarian from Precision Engineering, both very highly educated, smart planners, and they put together a great presentation for you today. So we're looking forward to it. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Monique Emerson with Precision Civil Engineering, and we're excited to discuss with you accessory dwelling units in the San Joaquin Valley. Again, this workshop is sponsored by San Joaquin Valley REAP and the APA Central Section. So just a little bit of background, a little bit about us. So again, my name is Monique Emerson, and I'm the Vice President of Planning here at Precision Civil Engineering.
And I'm Jenna Chilgarian, a Senior Associate Planner at Precision Civil Engineering.
So we're going to get right into it. First, we just want to go over some of the learning objectives. So our goal here is for you to understand the basics of ADUs, including definitions, types, size, scale, etc., to comprehend how state level ADU reform influences local ADU law, to identify barriers to ADU development and recognize the role that jurisdictions can play in finding solutions to these barriers, and to discover practical approaches to implementing ADU plans. So a little bit about what we're going to be covering. Our first section is ADU basics, then we're going to move into regulating ADUs, implementation, we're going to talk about programs in action, and then give you some key takeaways. So I'm going to hand it off to Jenna to talk about ADU basics.
Great, thank you, Monique. So I'll be going over section 1, ADU basics, and the goal of this first section is really to help us understand the context of ADUs as a concept. So getting started, what is an ADU? So this is really a textbook definition, I'd say. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit that is essentially a secondary housing unit on a single or multifamily residential lot that provides complete independent living facilities, including kitchen and bathroom facilities for 1 or more persons. And so I have these 2 images from the City of Clovis Cottage Home Program. The image on the left shows an ADU under construction, and you can see that this is definitely on a residential lot, somebody's backyard. And then the second image is the unit completed. And I think this is great because it shows how these units can resemble a small scale version of a single family residence. So then moving on, this next slide begins to break down the ADU concept a little further. So ADUs vary in structural forms, and as such, there are a few terms that you should know about. So I have listed here the ADU ABCs. So everything from an attached or detached ADU, and then there's an internal conversion, which can be an ADU or a JDU within an existing dwelling unit or within an existing accessory building. I have the junior ADU definition there, which is no more than 500 square feet and contained entirely within an existing primary unit. And then lastly, pointing out the statewide exemption ADU, which Monique will cover later in the presentation. So these are your ADU ABCs, and the graphics on the right are kind of visual representations of each of these terms. So in terms of what ADUs look like, let's dig a little deeper. So there are, as I mentioned, different types of ADUs. They can be attached, detached, or internal conversion. The size really varies and will be dependent on lot size, needs, and preferences. You can see this visualized in the image to the right. It really depends on the lot. The scale, while it is denser than a detached single-family residence, it does have similar scale and character. The layout will again depend on size, preferences, and other factors like privacy or accessibility. And then lastly, in terms of design considerations, agencies may apply development and design standards, whether that's through like a residential design guidelines or requiring or encouraging that ADUs match or look similar to the primary unit. But overall, those things will depend on what's important to that agency. ADU characteristics. So despite all these different forms, here are some common traits across all ADUs. So ADUs are accessory and they're adjacent to a primary unit. They're smaller than the average US single-family residential dwelling unit. They're often owned by one owner on a single or multi-family residential lot, and they cannot be sold as a separate legal asset. So these floor plans on this slide just show the small building footprint of these types of structures. And then digging a little bit deeper, I just wanted to alert or recognize that ADUs are not new. There's just a resurgence of interest in ADUs today. So this is for informational purposes only, but really ADUs in terms of being like a carriage house or coach house, garage units, those things started about 100 years ago. So you can follow along in this history timeline, but really we started to see the popularization of ADUs starting in the 2010s with state level reform, which Monique will speak to in a couple of slides. And then lastly, just covering the benefits of ADUs. There's benefits to homeowners, to communities, and also to the environment. And overall, really the bottom line is that these enhance the quality of life, help agencies meet housing goals, and then improve and enhance the environment. So now I'm going to hand it over to Monique, who will let us know about the new regulations from the state.
Okay, so I'm going to be going through ADU regulations, talking about state law that encourages ADUs, specific allowances, and then talk a little bit about jurisdictional control. So if any of you have tried to read the state law on ADUs, you know that it's a little bit complex. So I've tried to break it down, the most important points to help you understand what is and isn't allowed. So just quickly, as you know, the state has adopted regulatory changes to provide more flexibility in ADU development. Many of these laws became effective in January 2020, while others became effective in January of 2021. And most of these bills, which are listed to the right, are codified in Government Code Section 658.52.2. So just a quick summary of these regulatory changes. They broadly cover 8 topics. So I'm going to go through permitting and review processes, occupancy, parking, setbacks, lot size requirements, size, height, and number of units, then touch on impact fees and public improvements, and then talk a little bit about ADU incentives. So overall, these changes are intended to ensure faster permitting processes, greater inclusivity, lower costs, and reduced barriers. So before I jump into those 8 topic areas, I do want to point out that there are 4 ADU categories that are not subject to other ADU law. So development standards, for example, and these are statewide permissible ADUs, or we refer to them sometimes in this presentation as exemption ADUs. And they're permitted pursuant to subdivision E of the government code that I just told you about. ADUs, again, under this section should not have to comply with lot coverage, setbacks, height, etc. And these ADUs still must meet building code and health and safety requirements. Again, there are 4 of these categories. I'm only listing one here. This is sort of the most common example, which is one detached new construction ADU with 4-foot side yard and rear yard setbacks. And this ADU may be combined on the same lot with a JDU and must meet a maximum size unit requirement of 800 square feet and a height limit of 16 feet. So essentially what that means is if you have to permit up to an 800 square foot ADU with a height of 16 feet ministerially with no consideration of lot coverage or other requirements. So next I'm going to talk about permit and review processes. So these are those government regulations that allow for easier permitting and review processes. So first one, deemed approved. An application shall be deemed approved if a local agency has not acted on the completed application within 60 days. Ministerial approval, it requires ministerial approval of ADUs. No discretion can be utilized in this ministerial approval process. Also, code regulations, you can't require the correction of existing non-conforming zoning conditions as a condition for ministerial approval for an ADU or JDU. And then finally, substandard ADUs. This requires delayed enforcement against a qualifying substandard ADU for 5 years to allow for the correction of the violation. So next, talking about occupancy requirements. So the owner occupancy requirements have been frozen for all proposed ADUs permitted between January 1st, 2020 and January 1st, 2025. And this is important to note because a lot of jurisdictions had this owner occupancy restriction written into ordinances. So it cannot be enforced on anything permitted between those dates. However, it is required for JDUs. So one thing to note. And as far as short-term rentals, local agencies may require that the property be used for rentals of a term no longer than 30 days. But ADUs permitted ministerially under certain circumstances shall be rented for terms longer than 30 days. So what this means is that short-term rentals may be prohibited in certain circumstances. So that's something important to note, especially if you're working on a short-term rental ordinance. A lot of times people are wanting to build an ADU to rent it out for Airbnb. Well, if it's one of these ministerially approved ADUs, it cannot be rented for less than 30 days. So next, off-street parking requirements. So we have a table here that touches on the different types of ADUs and the parking requirements, just so there's differences between the different types of ADUs. So for example, an interior conversion within the home, no parking can be required, except if you have a JDU garage conversion, you can require parking. For a detached structure, you can't require parking or replacement parking. For a unit that's exempt and meets the under 800 square foot threshold, you can't require parking. For a detached unit greater than 800 square feet, you can require 1 parking per unit or bedroom, whichever is less, but agencies may reduce or eliminate this parking requirement. And then finally, for attached, none required, and that's per government code. If you have an attached ADU, no additional parking is required. A couple of other things to note about parking. State law allows agencies to require or may allow parking to be provided as tandem parking on a driveway. And the state law also requires the elimination of parking requirements when you have an ADU that's located within a half mile of public transit, or there's a car share program within 1 block, or the property is within a historic district. Again, I touched on this before, but local jurisdictions may eliminate parking requirements altogether. So this is just a quick visual of where parking could be provided on a lot. Next, talking about setbacks. Again, we have a table here that goes through the setback requirements within for each of these types of ADUs. The important thing to note here is that for interior conversions or conversions of detached structures, you can have a detached structure that doesn't meet minimum setbacks, and you cannot require it to meet a setback requirement. So, like for example, an attached garage, the rear and side setback would be whatever the existing setback is. For new construction, generally, the rear and the front requires a 4-foot setback. You can't have anything more than that for new construction. And one thing to note about front yard setbacks, for new construction, you can regulate front yard setbacks, but the one thing to note is that for those exempt ADUs, so the ones that are under 800 square feet, you can regulate the front yard setback, but it can't prohibit the allowance of that exempt ADU. So here's a little example of the ADU showing the 4-foot setback. Next, really important, lot size requirements. Local agencies cannot prohibit ADUs based on lot size. Density allowances, a compliant ADU shall not be deemed to exceed density allowances. So that's really important because agencies have general plans and density requirements, but an ADU shall not, that's permitted under this government code, shall not be deemed to exceed density allowances. So a little bit about size, height, and number of ADUs allowed. For minimum lot size, the government code allows you to set a minimum size, but it can't prohibit an efficiency unit, which an efficiency unit is defined as having 150 square foot minimum area. So for maximum sizes, that's where there's quite a few differences across the different types of ADUs. So for example, a max size for interior conversion within a home is 500 square feet if it's considered a JDU, and otherwise there's no limit. Conversion of a detached structure, it's whatever the size of that existing structure is. So if you have a large detached structure and convert it, there's no restriction, there's no maximum size restriction. And then talking about those that are exempt, again, that's just 800 square foot. That's the one that's allowed ministerially with no other considerations. For a detached ADU greater than 800 square feet, the minimum max size is 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet for a unit with more than one bedroom. And the max size is 1,200 square feet. For an attached dwelling, same, except for the max area is 50% of the existing residence. Talking about height, there's the only discussion on height in the ordinance is the 16-foot minimum that must be allowed for this ADUs that are under 800 square feet. And then as far as the number of units that are allowed, you can have one JDU and one ADU, depending on and kind of goes into more detail here. If you have any questions about number of units, we can talk about that at the end. So just a visual. So next, talking about impact fees and public improvements, which is critically important. State law now exempts ADUs that are less than 750 square feet from impact fees, and that includes local agencies, special districts, and water corporations. And ADUs that are less than 500 square feet are not subject to school impact fees. And ADUs that are greater than 750 square feet shall only be subject to impact fees that are proportional to the square footage of the primary dwelling unit. Another important thing to note is that no improvements can be required for an ADU, and that includes curb, gutter, and sidewalk. I know a lot of agencies would require that for an ADU in the past. It's not allowed. And finally, the installation of fire sprinklers in any ADU may not be required if sprinklers are not required for the primary dwelling unit. So lastly, just touching on ADU incentives, The California Health and Safety Code requires cities and counties to develop a plan that incentivizes and promotes ADU development. And so here's a couple of the state grants and financial incentives that are available. So what can a jurisdiction control? So it's great, that the state has made it ADUs easier to develop by mandating certain requirements or capping certain requirements, but there's still a decent amount of local control over the establishment of ADUs. For example, an agency can regulate parking, height, setback, etc., that preserve the integrity of historic and standards that preserve the integrity of historic structures. These standards shall be sufficiently objective to allow ministerial review. And another thing to note is that they may not preclude the allowance of the state exempt ADU or exceed other caps. Finally, the adequacy of water and sewer services, as well as impacts on traffic flow and public safety, may be used to limit areas where ADU development is permitted. So next, I'm just going to go through ADU implementation. So in our opinion, ADU implementation is sort of the critical component for having a successful ADU program or encouraging ADU development. One thing to note is that because ADUs are homeowner initiated, homeowners need to be willing and able to navigate the process in order to be successful. And we believe that agencies play an important role in guiding homeowners and by understanding the complete process. And what we mean by that is, sometimes at a city or a county, you have maybe a planner who's sort of the ADU expert, or the person who responds to questions on ADUs. But having that person understand just step one in this process is not enough. So agencies really need to understand the full process. And here we've kind of outlined, 1, 2, and 3, planning, permitting, construction, because a homeowner has to decipher the code and regulations. They have to figure out, if they need to hire an expert and draft plans. With permitting, they have to understand how to put together a complete application, when they get comments, what they need to do to review and make the corrections. And then when the ADU is approved, they need to understand the conditions, which may be impact fees or potential deed restrictions. And finally, with construction, there's the securing of financing, the hiring of contractors, then the construction and inspection process. So again, it's important that agencies have a understanding of the full process. So quickly, just talking about some barriers to ADU development. So as you're aware, most likely aware, there are land use, regulatory, and financial challenges to bringing ADU development to scale. And as far as land use barriers, you have potential local opposition, potential layout and existing site, access to utilities. For regulatory barriers, we've kind of touched on that before. Luckily, a lot of these regulatory barriers that were barriers in the past have been alleviated by state regulations that have been in response to some of these barriers. And then finally, financial barriers. Since ADUs are not a typical development type, they may be more difficult to get financed. So, some of these barriers could be being eligible for loans or getting an ADU appraisal. So how can you overcome these barriers to ADU development? So we believe agencies can play an important role in supporting homeowners through the process. They can break some of the land use barriers through educational marketing, maybe thinking about a program for a targeted neighborhood, providing technical assistance, such as assisting homeowners with plot plans, or preparing guidance documents. Ways to break down regulatory barriers is to provide interim guidelines, update their ordinance, emphasize by right opportunities, and establish a streamlined permitting program. So ways to break down some of these financial barriers, including reducing or eliminating impact fees, creating a pre-approved or establishing pre-approved plans, providing information on tailored lending products, or subsidized financing. So there are several tools, again, that agencies can use to support ADU development. First, I'm going to just touch on updating your ADU ordinance. So a primary goal of updating your ordinance should be to make it user-friendly to the reader. And this includes homeowners and agency staff. So we've provided here a general checklist to follow. So we would recommend reviewing state ADU law, drafting some interim guidelines, so there's something in place, drafting an ordinance, and in that ordinance include development standards and processing procedures, sending this draft ordinance to HCD for review. You want to find out early enough in the process if you're going in a direction that is not in compliance with state law. And then we would recommend supplementing the ordinance with internal policy and procedure to guide staff, supplement the ordinance with a guidance document for homeowners, and develop an ADU application and application checklist. So next, which we think is a really important piece as well, is develop pre-approved plans. A lot of agencies are doing this, which a primary goal of developing pre-approved plans should be cost savings to the customer in both time and money. And below are some items to consider when developing an RFP for pre-approved plans. So one thing you want to consider is the range of design experts that you want to include. That could be architects, engineers, designers. You want to also identify the extent of the plan set. So some jurisdictions have gone with just floor plans and elevations. Others have gone with, a full set of plans that could include electrical, structural, etc. And this is important because, if you want to see a homeowner from beginning to end, having that more full set of plans is ideal. And then just thinking about indemnification. So indemnifying the consultant team who is preparing these plans, and also thinking about indemnification for the city when they distribute these plans or make them available to the general public. In looking at designing the layout, looking at the location, if you want this to be a citywide program or location specific, the type of ADUs that you want to include in these pre-approved plans, attached, detached, internal conversion. You want to think about common lot sizes, also California building code thresholds. That actually becomes really important in developing these plans. The state exemption ADUs, which we talked about in our presentation. And you also want to think about impact fee thresholds and flexibility and accessibility. In selecting designs, or thinking about what you want to do in terms of architectural review, or looking at design for these pre-approved ADUs. You want to think about if you want to require common architectural styles. If you do, you have to think about structural loads of design features. So for example, tile roofs may make it more difficult to have a cost-effective design. And then that leads into, you want to make sure that these are going to be cost-effective constructions, and something you may consider is a design workbook. So finally, just want to touch on some other tools that can help you implement an ADU program. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but a primary goal of implementing an ADU program should be to reduce the resources needed to develop ADUs for both homeowners and agencies. And below are some of those program ideas. They can include a processing guide, in which we'll show you an example or some excerpts from a processing guide. And then a technical assistance. You can do many things, including designating a staff member who can be the ADU expert. Web pages are really important. Front counter educational marketing materials, and then having possibly the ability to have on-call consulting for things like helping a homeowner draw up a plot plan. And some of the other tools related to financial assistance is you can have fee waiver programs for ADUs and amnesty programs to legalize illegal ADUs, for example. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenna now to talk about ADU programs in action.
Great, thanks, Monique. So we have a few case studies here for you. For each of these case studies, we've contacted these agencies and received their responses. So the following slides will be a summary of those responses. So for the first case study, we have Clovis. So in terms of tools and programs, they have amended their development code to comply with state law. They do have a very well-known award-winning cottage home program that was established in 2017. And this program offers 3 streamlined plans. So I have the square feet right there, and you can see they're all under that 500 square foot threshold for properties that have alley facing rear yards. And their plans include floor plans and elevations. And they do have an accompanying brochure and application packet on their website that further details this program. In terms of ADUs in general, they have an informational webpage and a handout. And then they have an ADU loan program where they partnered with self-help enterprises to provide financing to eligible property owners within Old Town Clovis. Some of the primary challenges that they have identified. So previously there were development standards that had constraints on ADU development, but they noted that the updated state legislation made it more feasible for properties to develop ADUs. In terms of lessons learned, they stress the importance of informing residents about the available options for ADU development. And you can see on their website, they have some YouTube videos and handouts and things like that. And in terms of next steps, they're looking to expand their cottage home program to all properties with or without alleys. And over here I have on the right, cottage homes by the number, and then ADUs by the number. Our second case study is Stockton. So Stockton amended their development code to align with state law, and they noted a couple of items here. So they removed discretionary reviews and approvals for ADUs. They waived all city-controlled impact fees for ADUs, and they removed off-street parking requirements. They also developed a pre-approved ADU program in 2020, and this offers free of charge floor plans that are, you see the sizes here, 435, 625, and 745 square feet. And again, these are all under a threshold, the 750 square foot threshold that Nick spoke about. They said that they designed their floor plans intentionally to be cost effective for construction. They have a hold harmless agreement between the applicant owner and the city. They offer same day permit approval if utilizing the program. And they also supplement this program with a processing guide with step-by-step instructions. So some primary challenges that they note include impact fees. So yes, they waived the city controlled impact fees, but they stressed a new challenge with these impact fees from outside agencies, specifically the school district. And there are a lot of older lots in Stockton built in the early 1900s. And they said that there have been costly utility upgrades. And that's been a challenge for infrastructure capacity. Some lessons learned, they just spoke to kind of the legislative process, and if the state had allowed the ADU requirements through a standard development code process, that could have filled some of the gaps and decreased inconsistencies when implemented. And in terms of next steps, just continuing to support homeowners through the pre-approved ADU program process. It's less than a year old. And as you can see up at the top of the right screen, they have about 20 permits issued so far. Our third case study is Visalia. So tools and programs, I should note that the city of Visalia has recently received funding to carry out their program. So this is an ongoing effort. And we wanted to include them as sort of an agency that's early on in this process. And we are excited to see how they continue to develop their program. So tools and programs that they currently have in place, they do have an ADU ordinance, not yet updated to the most recent state laws. They do have an ADU handout on the planning division webpage, and they do provide a checklist with building permit applications. So really, I think that's pretty strong starting point as they move forward with their program development. Some primary challenges that they note, historically, there have been challenges with height limitations and lot coverage, et cetera. And they said these have all been solved through state level reform. They note the high cost of impact fees that have contributed to ADUs being cost prohibitive. And then just having limited staff resources in light of needing to update the ordinance. Some lessons learned and advice. We talked about permitting duplexes on corner lots, something that they're considering. And then next steps. So a couple of things for their program. They are looking into pre-approved ADU plans. So they're working with a consultant to make these plans. And they're looking into an ADU nexus study. So they're working with a consultant to conduct a nexus fee study, which they anticipate would result in lower impact fees associated with ADU development. And then, of course, updating their ordinance update, and they have received a LEAP grant to do so. Then our last case study is a case study that is from the Bay Area that we at Precision Civil Engineering are currently working on. So some tools and programs that the city is working on and we're assisting with, they already have amended their development code to align with state law. So a major next step for them was to develop a pre-approved ADU program, which is ongoing. They're offering free of charge building plan sets ranging from 500 square feet to 1,200 square feet. And each set includes a floor plan, elevations, a foundation plan, framing plan, structural details and calculations, electrical plan. So a full building plan set. We are also developing an ADU processing guide for them with step-by-step instructions, an internal policy and procedure to support staff as they process these applications, an ADU specific application and application checklist, and then updating their webpage. Some primary challenges that we're seeing as we're going through this program development is translating the state ADU laws and the city's ADU ordinance into an easy to understand user-friendly guidance document. And we kind of addressed some of these in the earlier part of our presentation of some things that we think are good ideas for doing so. Some lessons learned and advice. We found this to be really critical, is to understand the applicable California building code thresholds to design pre-approved plans that are cost effective. So really relying on a structural engineer to kind of walk through what those thresholds are and make sure that those plans are as cost effective as possible. The next steps, we're excited to finalize and roll out and help City of Oakley roll out the program. Now back to Monique to bring it home.
So just some key takeaways. So I know that was a lot of information that we just presented to you, and we are going to be available for question and answers, but first we just wanted to provide some key takeaways. So number one, eliminate barriers. Although, as we mentioned, many barriers have been eliminated by the state, there are still many hurdles that prevent or make it difficult for a homeowner to get through the process. So having a full ADU program that assists from beginning to end is really ideal. Also, we recommend getting the word out. There's still many homeowners who don't have any clue that many of the barriers that prevented ADUs on their property in the past have been eliminated. So we'd recommend using social media and the website. You know, if you have city events, if you have ADU brochures, handing those out, or other forms of outreach just to get that word out. And then lastly, which I think is really important, is to simplify. So ADU regulations are really complex, and it's easy to overregulate and make circumstances more complex than needed. So whenever possible, we really recommend that you simplify, you know, guidance documents, simplify, you know, anything that you can, just to make it an easier process to follow overall. And that concludes our presentation, and we're here to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you, Jenna and Monique. That was, I felt like I need to go hear that again because there was so much information. Good thing we recorded it and we'll post it to the website. So Robert and I have been, all the questions that come through chat, you've been busy presenting. So let's start from the beginning. What government code does section E come from? I think that was early in your presentation.
Government code section 65852.2.
Say it one more time, Jenna, the numbers.
65852.2.
All right. Mark Staples asks, when can a city deny a garage conversion?
When can a city deny a garage conversion? So good question. You know, if there's some health and safety regulation or building code regulation that the garage conversion would not meet, are we talking about attached or detached? I guess that's a critical point. for an attached conversion, actually, now I'm sorry, I'm thinking about it completely. So, you can regulate a garage conversion. No, I'm thinking it's existing, so there's no setbacks to regulate, there's no lot coverage to regulate, you can't regulate density. So yeah, it would really be, just thinking out loud, it would be if it didn't meet a building code requirement or a health and safety requirement.
And
Okay,
again, if anyone has a question that they'd like to ask live, just please raise your hand and we'll get them in the order that we receive them. But we do have several questions in the chat to go through.
right. Kyle Lopez Schmidt asked, any difference in requirements for registered historic properties?
So the state guidance, or sorry, the state regulation does provide and allow for cities and counties to regulate ADUs when they're in a historic district. So there's nothing specific in state law other than that is one of the things that a city or county can regulate. So if you are in a historic district, the city can regulate architectural standards for that ADU.
Okay, for an existing detached garage, can a second or third floor be added if less than the height of the primary residence?
So can you repeat the question?
An existing detached garage, can a second or third floor be added if less than the height of the primary residence?
So there's nothing in state law that would prohibit that, but there's nothing that mandates a city or a county or agency allow that. So it is possible, but that would be something that would have to be regulated by the local jurisdiction.
Okay. Jamie Bax asked, what about connection fees to water and sewer facilities? I think, yeah.
Yeah, there are allowances for the sewer and water connection fees. There is some provisions in state law that allows a little bit of leniency for JDUs. But that's, I'm trying to think of this section. So that is, that will be a follow-up question. So
Okay. But you said impact fees were not were exempt, so maybe this is related to that.
Yeah, impact
yeah.
fees for anything under 750 square feet cannot be required, but in terms of connection fees, that's different than impact fees.
So
Okay.
Jamie, if you'd like to raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can elaborate on the question. Yeah.
Okay, Carl, our friend Carl asked, my understanding is that a JADU is an accessory dwelling unit that is carved out of the existing footprint of the primary dwelling, not added to the primary dwelling. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And there are specific provisions for JDUs in section 65852.22, which specifically state that a JDU has to be within the existing walls of an existing structure, existing primary dwelling unit. And
Okay.
it cannot be expanded to, that's not considered a JDU once you expand.
All right. Emma De La Rosa asked, how do ADUs support RENA?
ADUs support RENA because you can use the units that are developed as an ADU to meet your RENA numbers.
That's right. And that's going to be a big thing this next cycle. Okay, Mark Staples asks, are there groups or agencies making these presentations to the contractor, construction, CALBO, et cetera groups? I don't know if you have the answer for that, but it seems like it would be helpful.
Yeah.
So that they know what to expect from planners when they go to City Hall is the second half.
Right. All right. I agree. Maybe we can contact the BIA and see if they would like to
So the short answer to the question is we don't know. We don't know if there's,
Right.
we have not offered this presentation to any contractor groups, but we can certainly reach out and do that. Michael, I don't know if you want to unmute Jamie Bax at this point. Real quick.
Oh, sure, we can do that. Allowed to talk. Go ahead, Jamie.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
Yes.
good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking my question. Yeah, my question was in regards to connection fees, not the impact fees. I understand the impact fee portion. What we're running against, it's us working with our public works department, is that there are ADUs going into service districts that service water that are county maintained, and they don't often have the connection capacity. But then also the question is, you know, are they still paying that connection fee? We have been assuming yes, but I just want to reaffirm that.
You know, Jamie, I know that a response to that question is out there. I don't know if you've ever looked at the HCD guidebook online, but there's an FAQ section, and I'm almost positive that it talks about connection fees. And I'm sorry I can't answer it right out, but I know someone did ask that question, or it's a frequently asked question, and I'm pretty sure it's responded to. But I'll find the answer, and I could, you know, email out to the group, or when we send the PowerPoint presentation. I think Jenna had mentioned before that we can provide some. Oh, Jenna found it.
I mean, we can do it later, or I can read this.
Yeah, she's gonna go ahead and respond.
So ADUs converted from an existing space, as well as JDUs, shall not be considered by a local agency to be a new residential use for the purpose of calculating connection fees or capacity fees, unless constructed with a new single-family dwelling.
Unless constructed with a new single-family dwelling. So that's the kicker there. You're saying that these are new single-family homes. So that would be, sounds like they would be.
Okay, thank you. I'll definitely look at the HCD handout too. Thanks.
Okay, the next question is, we are in the process of an RFP to do a comprehensive zoning update. Can ADU section or chapter be added instead of an adoption of a whole ordinance?
That is typical, having just an ADU section in your development code or zoning ordinance. So it just depends on how you've structured your ordinance. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a standalone. It could be within a section of your zoning ordinance or development code.
Okay, so the answer is yes. Okay. Can you clarify again the question of adding an additional story to a detached garage? Is the addition of another floor to the detached garage considered an ADU?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it would be considered an ADU. Now, whether or not it's permitted would be up to the local jurisdiction. There's nothing in state law that would require that a second story be automatically approved by a local jurisdiction. So it would be considered an ADU. If you go back and look at the definitions of what an ADU is, it would be considered an ADU. But again, that is something that is not specifically regulated by state law. So it would be really up to the local jurisdiction of whether or not it's allowed.
Okay, Kamara asks, can a lot with existing multiple detached single-family dwellings have an additional ADU or a JADU?
I think that's a good question. Oh, I think you stumped me there. I'm trying to think about state law. If there is a provisions for multifamily in the ordinance. Let's see. That's another one. Madera County out there stumping me with their questions. We'll get back to you again. Following this presentation, we'll send out the handout, and we'll also include some of those questions that came up that didn't have straightforward answers, and we'll send them out to everyone.
Question from Michael Segala here. Can we compile ADU ordinances and plans from across the valley? And is there any relevancy in doing that? Is there economies of scale? Is it that easy? Can we get HCD to help us approve these ordinances and plans and make them blanket for the valley, whoever wants to use them? Or is that a not rational approach to this?
Well, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's quite a bit that local agencies can still regulate. So, I mean, I think that we can look at some of those ordinances, and there could be some example ordinances out there that maybe are very not restrictive, I guess is the word I'm looking for, and put those out there, and then jurisdictions can add layers for what they want to regulate.
Okay.
And I do know that there's some regional efforts, so like a county and a neighboring county could like partner together and do something, or same thing with cities. So I've seen that in California generally. So that's something else to think about if you don't want to do, all 8 counties.
Right.
Working with a couple of agencies, there is no one size fits all. So there's some cities that really want to focus and address architectural standards, for example, or where size is really important, and they want, but there's other agencies where architectural standards are not that important because these are going to be in the back of the primary residence for the most part. So that's less important to them. So although there's a lot out there and you can kind of use model ordinances as a starting point, you do want to make sure that your ordinance is really, relevant to your needs. So each city or county's needs.
Okay. Okay, we have 3 minutes, guys. How can place-based nonprofits like community development corporations help jurisdictions with creating and implementing ADU policies as well as actual projects? Well, I mean, I think they can inquire, get to know the city staff, and actually help build these if possible. What are your guys' thoughts?
I mean, homeowner assistance would be one of those things that I think that type of, so a nonprofit can, get the word out to some of those homeowners and assist. So it's planners and public agencies are not always the best, especially because everyone's so busy right now at really getting down to the meat of issues and understanding what the needs of residents are, those people who are really going to build these. And I think those groups can maybe help bridge that gap between like a city agency and the residents of a community.
Very good. Can you clarify if short-term rentals are permitted in ADUs?
So the state regulations allow for jurisdictions to regulate short-term rentals, so to not allow them. So there's that allowance. But for ministerially approved ADUs, those cannot be used for short-term rentals.
Okay.
So that's one where I think it would be good for us to highlight the specific code section and send that out to everyone. So it's really clear, because there's some nuance there. But yes, certain types of ADUs cannot be used for short-term rentals.
Okay. We'll have to send a follow-up to this group. Can a vacant lot be built with a new residence, an ADU and a JADU all at once?
Yes.
All right. We need assistance with ADU's design and the ordinance development. What are the first steps we should take?
So I think we have in our slides, we have some recommendations. If you have funding to do it, what you should think about when developing an RFP to get that assistance. I think just the basic or first step that I would recommend is figuring out what your needs are. And then from there, moving on to finding funding if you don't have funding, and then trying to engage a consultant or put out that RFP.
Very good. And Robert, we do have ADU assistance as part of our technical assistance platform.
We do indeed.
So there you go.
Absolutely. So
There's a
There-
freebie to your jurisdictions, first come, first serve. And
yeah, and then of course, the assistance can come through the valley. Also, you may also want to talk to your local MPO, Regional Transportation Planning Agency, as well, for those in terms of the jurisdictions.
Yep. Okay, last question, I think. If a local agency has not adopted an ADU ordinance, but still has language for a second dwelling unit, is that language still applicable, or does the city default to state regulations?
You would default to state regulations. There's some, there may be some allowances if you have certain requirements where, so if you go back and look at the tables that we provided where you have some local control over that area, if your ordinance is specific to those restrictions, like lot coverage, for example, you can still, that ordinance dealing with lot coverage may still, you may still be able to implement that, but where you have conflicts, that state law would supersede your ordinance.
And that's where we recommended developing interim guidelines that you'd have on your website to address the state regulations.
Yeah, as interim guidelines could be helpful in bridging that gap between your existing ordinance and keeping things in there that you still can control, but still being able to implement the state regulations.
Well, there is a whole lot to a little cottage ADU behind someone's house, I tell you that. I'm a little bit overwhelmed. We might have to have a follow-up ADU workshop, given the amount of interest in this one and the amount of questions that we received. But thank you once again to our panelists for doing a fine job of putting this together. We'll, like I said, we recorded this, we'll post it to the website. We'll get these PowerPoints that were shared today out to you. And see where we can lead. I think once the RENA numbers come out and all our cities realize how much more housing they need to accommodate, I think this topic is going to come up again strong. So stay tuned, everyone, and thank you for participating. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Michael,
Yes.
can you download the chat